So everybody keeps saying that social media is ruining society. I guess before social media, back in 2008, everything was perfect, and it has since fallen apart. I don't really remember that far back. My short-term memory is kind of shot. I don't know why. I actually just finished reading this really interesting book called Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. He published it in 1985. 1985. And it's a warning to us that if we don't turn the TV off and start reading books, we're going to become an empty husk of a society obsessed with entertaining ourselves and incapable of doing anything serious. Good thing we listen to this guy, no? I'm just going to say this. I'm going to say this for me, and I'm going to say this for most of the people watching right now, because I see my stats. We weren't here. We were born into the society that was already amusing itself to death. So our worldview is completely warped by that. It doesn't mean we're bad people. Maybe it means we're a little bit more frivolous than our grandparents, but we didn't cause this. This was a process that was already thoroughly underway before most of us were even born. Postman's basic premise is that the effects of television have been harmful to the psyche, that it's altered the way that we think in terms of being entertained and being entertaining, being amused and being amusing. And we don't think in any sort of serious terms. We don't ponder these great issues. We don't talk about Plato or Socrates, what we do on this channel. And he's saying as a society, Americans are just getting more shallow, more empty. Now, as I said before, we were all born into this shallow, empty society. So it sucks for us, right? Anyway, Postman makes a really good point, and that point is that the founding fathers were intellectuals. They came out of the Enlightenment. The mantra of the Enlightenment is, I think, therefore I am, Descartes. I touched upon these subjects in the video on writing. I'll actually link that at the bottom in case you missed it. When the printing press came out and people became more literate, they were able to read the Bible, they were able to read other works. It went from sort of an oral tradition where people went to church and they were sung their mass to being a literary tradition where people could read the Bible and interpret it for themselves. And of course, this led to much warfare and hunger and deprivation and just horrible, horrible things. But then after that, we got the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment is basically a period of reason. We got the scientific revolution from that. We got all sorts of technologies from that. It really made America what it is. America could handle it. Apparently, the French could not handle it because the same Enlightenment in which we thrived, they set Europe on fire. The French do too much sometimes. They ended up decapitating thousands of people and went through this massive bloody war across Europe. People were convinced Napoleon was the Antichrist, but it was the same Enlightenment, and he used Enlightenment principles, so Enlightenment good, Enlightenment bad. Enlightenment good. Not for the people who were alive then, but for us, Enlightenment good. Postman goes on to state how incredibly literate early Americans were. Now, here's an interesting thing, because he uses as an example the Massachusetts colony. Now, the Massachusetts colony is notoriously literate. The Pilgrims had to read the Bible. Like 90% of the men could read, and like 70% of the women could read and interpret information. And they were shipping in thousands of books from England every single year. Using the example of the Massachusetts colony is a bit biased because they were by far the smartest colony, by far the most literate colony. We had other colonies. The Massachusetts colony was not the only colony in early America. He sort of points this out and says, yes, there were colonies in the South. Like, no, don't, yes, there were colonies in the South. You have to be honest that there are different traditions for different parts of the United States. So Postman cherry-picking the Massachusetts colony to prove his point, I would just like to point out that that did not apply to the whole of the United States. Actually, there's a really good book I'm reading right now called The Renegade History of the United States. And that author argues that maybe early Americans, maybe colonial Americans weren't as intelligent, weren't as literate as Postman likes to say, but that is beside the point. I was born in Massachusetts. I am from Massachusetts. So I'll give Postman that point. That for the first few hundred years of the United States, we were incredibly literate. Why this is important is because when you're literate, when you're reading something, when you're reading a point and you have to decipher that point, there's no pictures. That's a completely different level of abstract thinking that's going on in your mind. Basically, you're looking at all these little things. You're looking at letters and sentences, and somebody who doesn't read would look at this like it's just complete gibberish. But we understand it because we can read. And so this goes directly into our mind, and we have a certain level of understanding based on reading. Anyway, in the 1800s, things started to shift. The United States kind of went from a highly intelligent population of people that would stand around for hours listening to Lincoln Douglas debates, who could understand complex arguments when spoken to them, and could read complex arguments in the paper and in books and interpret them, to a nation that had pictures, to a nation that had the telegraph, where messages were very short. So now we're getting into the age of journalism, early journalism. A lot of it was yellow journalism. I'll probably have to do a video on that because it's coming back. Anyway, so Postman makes the argument that we went from an incredibly literate, highly intelligent population to a population that formed their beliefs through jingles, through pictures. Kind of dumbed down population. And that's where we were starting around 1900. That's when the jingles came in. That's when the advertising came in. Because before we had these little jingles, there were ads. Ads made a lot more sense. Do you want to buy a horse? This is a good horse. It'll cost you this much money. It's got great teeth. To, don't we love horses? Don't we want to be like horses? These sort of abstract concepts that play to our emotions and not to our mind. And that's where we kind of were around 1900. And then introduce the television. The television. Oh, who doesn't love television? Who doesn't have a television in their house? Does anybody not have a television in your house? If you're watching YouTube, I wonder if that counts as television. Postman argues that with the advent of the television, we became obsessed with entertainment. Obsessed with entertainment. Everything had to be entertaining. Now, of course, soap operas are entertaining. Of course, plays are entertaining. That's not really what Postman is talking about. He's like, of course you should have entertaining stories. Of course there should be movies. We're not discussing this. We've had theater since the Greeks and probably before. We have no problem with TV being used as a means to distribute theater. What Postman's problem is when everything becomes entertainment. When teaching becomes entertainment. When religion becomes entertainment. When politics becomes entertainment. When everything becomes entertainment. Like, we can't think of things seriously. We can't be expected to do research. Everything must follow the blueprint of a soap opera, of entertainment. And Postman says that this will be the death of us. This is 161 pages of warning about everything that has since come to pass, and no one listened. I feel so bad for this man and for everybody who read it in 1985, like, oh, I'm so glad he's finally writing this. I'm so glad someone's finally saying something. Maybe we can finally do something about it. Oh my God, nothing got done. Nothing at all. The three main arenas that Postman argues are being destroyed by television are politics, teaching, and religion. Politics. Postman points out that in the mid-1800s, Lincoln and Douglas were having these long debates, these like 7-hour debates where the opening statement was like 45 minutes and the audience was listening and chiming in and could follow questions. It could remember something from the beginning of the speech hours before. They could remember what the other person said and how this person is going to respond to it. And Postman is completely dismayed because in the age of television, that simply was not the case. Now, 35 years later, we have that again in podcasts. People can seek out longer arguments. They can seek out more in-depth analysis. So actually, I think internet improved upon this. Do they? Do people seek out more in-depth analysis? Some do. Now, this is the mid-1800s. By the mid-1900s, we have TV. Kennedy looked that much better than Nixon in the debate, and Kennedy won. Nixon swears that he lost that debate and lost the election because Kennedy was wearing makeup and he wasn't wearing any makeup, and it had nothing to do with him being Satan incarnate. So TV gave that point to Kennedy. And that's when we really start to see how important it is that a candidate be television ready, be ready for prime time. Now, this was its pinnacle at Reagan, an actor. Was he the best candidate for the job? Did he look like the best candidate for the job? Did he come across as the best candidate for the job? Was he playing the best candidate? Was that the role he was currently playing? I've met people in my parents' generation who swear that Reagan was a complete doofus. But he didn't look like a doofus. He looked like a good president. And now where are we? We literally have a reality television president. Some will say it worked out better with Obama because even though he was a quote unquote celebrity, he was still probably the most qualified man willing to take that job. He happened to be tall. He happened to be good looking. He happened to give eloquent speeches and have a perfect family. So it was great for television. Now, Postman wrote this book before Bill Clinton was playing the sax in Arsenio Hall. Like, being able to play the sax has any bearing on what kind of president you'll be, but whatevs. It's just another example of how television took over politics. Now we've kind of returned to an age before all of that, because Biden is not charismatic. Biden is not attractive. Biden wouldn't be cast as president in a local theater's play. That's how much he does not come across as the president. Unless he's the president that dies in the first act so somebody else comes and take over. Biden sort of is a return to normalcy in that way, in that he is a stuffed suit that represents a party. I don't know if it's a rejection of entertainment culture or if it's a rejection of Donald Trump. It seems to me to be an absolute rejection of Donald Trump. We're just over him. So maybe Biden is a fluke. But Postman 35 years ago warned us about Trump. Now, the second aspect, which television has corrupted according to Postman, is teaching. He says that lessons don't have to be entertaining. In fact, they should not be entertaining because there are a lot of things that just aren't funny. Now, ultimately, I agree that learning itself is rewarding. We don't need to wash it down with sugar. He criticizes Sesame Street for doing this. He criticizes a lot of what PBS is doing with Nova. He's like, why should this be entertaining? Why should there be a story behind this? Why can't we just learn about whales, just the raw facts about whales? And here I am, 35 years later, like, nobody wants to learn these raw facts about whales. Give them names, make them do a thing. Can we get some B-roll in here? But Postman says, no. You learn about whales. You learn about whales as they are. You should not be having fun in school. Here's where I agree with Postman on this point, is that to teach a lesson now to modern audiences, it's very similar to TV in that you can't ask anyone for prerequisites. They must be able to turn on the video and learn everything they have to learn from that video. You can't ask them to come with prior knowledge. Even me saying, go back and check out my video on writing is asking too much of the audience. Now, I know my audience. I know my audience has already seen that video. They have opinions about that video. They have stuff to offer and add to that video. But let's just say a person is browsing YouTube and they come across this and they say, she wants me to do homework to understand what she's talking about? Ridiculous. That is a harmful mindset because concepts, especially in the modern world, are incredibly complicated. They're complicated. So to have a population, especially in a democracy where we make our own choices on how to govern ourselves, to have that population be unwilling to learn anything and be outright anti-intellectual is harmful. It's just harmful. It's the same point that is made in the renegade history of the United States, is that if you want to have a democratic population, they got to be a little smarter because there's no one to rule them. They have to rule themselves. And in order to rule themselves, they got to have a little bit more up here. So Americans have a little less than they need to up here, and it's kind of gotten us into this dangerous cycle of not wanting to learn more, of not wanting to learn the lessons that we need to apply to properly govern ourselves. And so that's where Postman's problem with teaching in an entertaining way comes in. I think that ship has sailed. Maybe if our parents had listened to Postman instead of changing the channel to Dynasty, we wouldn't be in this mess, but someone shot JR and they needed to figure out who that was. So thank you, parents. Not my parents, other people's parents. Now, the third way that Postman says that television is ruining society, or has ruined society, past tense, is that it has corrupted religion. Religion, these televangelists, as they're called, they speak at you from the TV. Now they speak at you from YouTube. And their message is just so sickly sweet because they can't offend anybody. They cannot offend anybody. They can't let their audience turn away. Of course, in church, you can't just get up and leave when the pastor says something you don't like. When the pastor says you have to act in a proper fashion, you have to say certain things, you can't just get up and screw this guy, I'm leaving. You can't do that. You have to sit down and you have to take that lesson. But with televangelism, with these YouTube gurus, you can just turn it off, which means that their message has become so watered down. They just tell you what you already want to hear. That means you're the leader and they're the follower. And that's where we are right now. Now, Brett Weinstein complains about this a lot. He says that we have influencers. We don't have leaders anymore. There's no MLK anymore. There's no MLK to get up and say, we need to do this hard thing so that we can have a better quality of life for our children. Nobody wants to hear that. Could you imagine turning off MLK? I know, that's just so disrespectful. But could you imagine if MLK was alive today? How big of a following do you think MLK would have right now? Honestly. How big of a following do you think Malcolm X would have right now? I don't think that they would be the major leaders that they were. And that's a sad thought to think. Now, Postman is specifically speaking of televangelists, and he's speaking of Christian televangelists who come on TV and say, send us some money and we'll pray for you. Hustlers. He's speaking about hustlers. These are hustlers. The good part of a preacher or a televangelist not being able to say anything you don't like is he can't say anything racist. He can't be like, okay, the Jews killed Christ. Let's burn them. For a long time, that's what preachers could and did say. So, silver lining here. Maybe that is a major silver lining, is that we're now in an age where it might be sickly sweet, but at least everybody is protected and defended. What do you think? Is this actually a good thing? One major point that Postman points out that I absolutely agree with is that when you have a televangelist or you have someone on the screen telling you something about God, about spirituality, it becomes less about the lesson and more about that person. What is that called? Idolatry. That's called blasphemy. That is absolutely wrong in nearly every religion. And there's a good reason for it. The plus side to the internet is that we have more options of who we should blaspheme with, who we should idolize. There's a golden calf for everyone now, huh? Postman warned us. We are where we are. So what is the silver lining in all this? One obvious silver lining that I can find is that Neil Postman died in 2003. He never lived to see the Kardashians. He never lived to see social media. And normally it's a terrible thing to wish death upon a person. But this guy dying before society really went to, you know what? This is a blessing as far as I'm concerned. I feel terrible for old people that go out now. I feel especially bad for this guy at the bottom. Wrote this blurb at the bottom, says, this comes along at exactly the right moment. Oh my God. We must confront the challenge of his prophetic vision. Oh, they didn't. They did not confront that challenge, no. Jonathan Cazal, still alive and well. Hopefully he's like other old people who just don't have the internet. There are other silver linings to the television age that I don't think Postman necessarily addresses. Maybe he couldn't see it from where he was, and now 35 years later we can see it. First and foremost, for people who grew up in highly dysfunctional families, people who were abused, they see that most families are not like that. They see that abuse is abnormal. The sitcom family might not be perfect. It might not even be very realistic, but very rarely does the husband come home drunk and smack his wife around or smack the kids around. So people who grew up in that environment can say, hey, this isn't normal. I don't want to live in this, and I'm going to leave it and give myself a better life. You look back on a lot of history, And where would they even understand that before television? How could they understand that abuse isn't normal if that's all they've seen? They've never seen anything else. I think about it too with these fundamentalist Mormons, not the regular Mormons, but the Mormon fundamentalists, the ones that have the many wives and these unfortunate cut dresses and the hair that actually, the hair is not always so bad. Some of these women can really rock it. And there's many of them married to this one unimpressive man. And I'm thinking, what are you doing, girl? But they didn't have the TV. They don't know it's not normal. They have no other frame of reference. So I feel that that is one silver lining from television, is it can at least show people what is normal family behavior and that they should seek that out and reject abuse. Let me know if you agree. Here's another problem I had with Postman's argument, that we've become a society that must either be entertained or be entertaining. I'm like, so what? So we're fun to be around. So we're goofy. Why shouldn't we be goofy? There's no wars. We have sunshine. We have food. We have water. Why should we be miserable? I get why the Pilgrims were miserable. Farming that land is hard. This was back before they had anesthetics. Life was hard. You shouldn't be goofy when life is hard. You should act in a way that is appropriate to your situation. Now, since the end of the Second World War, America has had it pretty good. It's kind of going through some things now. I'm going to admit right now, we got some stuff going on, but generally we still have it really good. You're watching me on internet that the military developed and just gave away. So why shouldn't we live a good life? I don't see that there's a fundamental problem with living a good life and being entertaining and entertaining your family and friends. Have you ever been forced to be around people who aren't entertaining at all? They don't think they have to say anything funny. They don't think they have to say anything interesting. They just be there. They're just there. Is that mess up? I don't know. Like I said, I was born into this society that he complains about. So I think that we should all be funny and we should all be having a great time and we should all just enjoy our lives to the maximum. Because there's gonna be heartache. Why not enjoy the good times while you can? And when the heartache comes around, then you feel the heartache. This is my philosophy, but of course, I'm a fish in water. Where is the water? I don't know. Now, I mentioned this briefly before, but social media has undone some of the damage that Postman is talking about. Because before, there were just a few networks that wanted to sell the maximum amount of ads, which means everything had to be entertaining and they had to have great ratings. Now, people can seek out what they find entertaining, and not everybody finds laugh-in entertaining. Not everybody finds the same thing entertaining. Some people find educational things to be more entertaining, so they seek out educational things. So in 1985, maybe those people, those intellectuals, I feel bad for intellectuals from 1985 now that I think about it, but maybe those intellectuals were on their own, and now they can go online and find a community of other intellectuals, and they can find lectures, they can find these things, and they can enrich themselves. So maybe social media has gone a long way into undoing some of that damage. Anyway, why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because people say social media is ruining society. Maybe society was already ruined. Maybe social media just came in to a ruined society and just sped everything up. Social media really is the continuation of print, magazine media, and television. It's like print and TV had a baby, and social media was that baby. Are you gonna blame the baby for being born? That's not fair. We were the babies born out of this age. The foundation was already laid long before we were born, and we're just in a position where we have to see what is going on, where do we want our lives to go, and then move forward from there. But to say that we did this, our generation did this, no. Don't ever let anyone try to blame you for what is the natural evolution of society and technology, because we didn't do this. This was already underway long before we even got here. We were born into it. Can we make it better? Yes, we can. Now, like I said, I don't support everything that is in this book. I think he's taking some unnecessary jabs and making some assumptions about the way things used to be, this nostalgia for an age that may or may not have ever existed outside of Massachusetts. However, I did buy 5 copies of this book. I am going to distribute them to every one of my siblings and also one of my friends who I know will get a kick out of it. Plus, it's a pamphlet. It's like 160 pages. So I'm going to see what my siblings think. They're very smart people, and I'm going to see if they agree with him or not. Now, if I bought out the online bookstore where you would have gone to get this book, I apologize. If you can find it, I highly recommend that you read it. You'll have a lot to think about when you're all done. And let me know, has TV ruined society or has it made it better? And how different is social media from the television age? Subscribe.